Making headlines for this week of October the 2nd, a UN roundup. Key highlights from a flurry of activity, winding up a whirlwind month of shifts. Saudi scandal. WikiLeaks reveals secret deal between UK and Saudi Arabia for involvement on UN Human Rights Council. Anatomy of a scandal. How the refugee crisis benefits the wealthy and penalizes the general population in Sweden. And dangerous impulses. How our human addictions are controlling our thoughts and our action.
With news around, upon, within, and beyond our planet, the program making disclosure official. This is Cosmic Vision News. Here is Jeffrey West.
Greetings and blessings to all. There have been many smaller things unfolding in the past week involving the United Nations and other events. It is unlikely that I will be able to touch upon all of them. At first glance, each little event may not seem like a potentially newsworthy item. It is not until one is able to begin connecting the dots, to begin to see patterns of these unfolding smaller actions as they contribute to a much larger unfolding drama that most have not yet begun to see. After all the attention given to the Pope and his activities, without any questions being asked as to why the Vatican is not surrendering its vast wealth and information to the poor people of the world, it was immediately after the Pope's address to the joint session of the U.S. Congress that Republican House Leader John Boehner submitted his emotional resignation amidst a fracturing of the Republican Party. Several other global leaders made their feelings known to the UN General Assembly during their allotted time at the podium. Press TV wrote on September 29th that mainstream media outlets have censored the comments made by Argentine President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner at the UN General Assembly, where she harshly criticized the U.S. international policies. The Argentine president questioned countries such as the United States for attacking groups including the ISIL Takfiri terrorists, which Washington previously backed against the Syrian government. Where do ISIS or ISIL and Al-Qaeda take their guns from? Yesterday's freedom fighters are today's terrorists, Fernandez said, blasting U.S. policies vis-a-vis terrorism. The ISIL terrorists, who were initially trained by the CIA in Jordan in 2012 to destabilize the Syrian government, control large parts of Syria's northern territory. The group sent its members into neighboring Iraq in June and seized large parts of land there. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu continues to blow hot air to the world. In 2013, the Jerusalem Post quoted part of Netanyahu's UN address as being, "Israel will stand alone to prevent nuclear Iran." In that speech, he drew his infamous red line over the image of a bomb to highlight Israel's insistence that they will only tolerate Iran up to a point, the red line on the diagram. In 2014, Netanyahu told the UN that Israel's fight is the world's fight. Very likely, this was veiled language, suggesting that the global cabal of the world had better pick themselves up and help Israel. Not to be outdone this year, Netanyahu's follow-up act was to stand in silence for 45 seconds while he stared down at all the UN members, as though giving them an evil eye. And one may argue that there is much truth to that. The article reported that Netanyahu paused his speech before the UN General Assembly on Thursday for 45 seconds to protest what he called the utter silence from most of the world on Iran's threats to the destruction of his nation. Netanyahu is still clinging to some naive belief that Iran is going to attack Israel when Iran has not attacked a country in over 200 years. And yet, the United States has been in war for at least 222 of its 239 years in existence. Chinese President Xi Jinping not only met with Obama in Washington, but also gave his address to the UN focusing on gender equality and seeking common and sustainable development, as well as being cooperative with win-win partnerships. This, according to the website china.org.cn. Jinping also announced a $2 billion Southern Hemisphere Development Fund to support all the countries that have historically been left behind by the wealthy Northern Hemisphere countries. Then came the show that arguably everyone was waiting for, and these were the speeches made by Russian President Putin, U.S. President Obama, and the subsequent meeting that followed those speeches. Sources had been speculating that Putin might come out onto the podium with a big and powerful show of words. To the surprise of some, he did not do this. I personally was not expecting him to do this. Putin has demonstrated himself as having the patience of a grandmaster chess player, and that patience comes from having a 9th level black belt in Taekwondo and 8th level black belt in Karate. He swims with dolphins, flies fighter jets, drives race cars, plays hockey, and so much more. Arguably, there is no other global leader with his credentials and pedigree. He will wait and let others make mistakes. The United States and other Western countries have been making mistake after mistake since the failed U.S. takeover of Ukraine. That is all they continue to do. Putin appears to be one who believes that actions speak louder than words, and he is clearly active in so many ways. The London Guardian, in covering Putin's address, reported that egotism was a word Putin used more than once as he gave a thinly veiled dressing down to the United States. His speech covered little new ground, but sharpened his critique of the current world order and called on the world to come together to fight terrorism in the Middle East. Putin bemoaned a world in which egotism reigns supreme, and railed against the arrogant hubris of the West. Putin has been giving much of the same speech since he first laid out his grievances in February of 2007. The unipolar world in which Washington dominates, he says, has led to a more dangerous world than that of the Cold War, when an imperfect but useful balance stopped any one country from dominating. Putin says he can work with Obama despite trading barbs on Syria and ISIS. This speech, his first to the UN General Assembly since 2005, comes as Putin visits the U.S. for the first time since the Ukraine crisis prompted acrimony, mistrust, and sanctions. It was notable for its intonation. Putin adopted the tone of a wise elder, alternately angered by the bellicosity and saddened by the naivety of the West. You want to ask the people who created this situation, do you at least understand what you have done? But I fear that the question would just hang in the air because, after all, they have not turned their back on policies based on self-certainty, a sense of superiority and impunity. Putin laid it out on the table that Syria, Ukraine, and ISIS are the result of the West's rampant egotism. Several websites tried to paint Obama's address to the UN as an example of a strong U.S. foreign policy. Of course, those sources are not reporting the hyperinflating U.S. dollar due to countries selling off U.S. Treasury debt ahead of an anticipated collapse of the current U.S. dollar in favor of a new U.S. currency. Admittedly, Obama's speech, by my own personal assessment, was not so impressive, as it contained rhetoric that appeared to be written by the global cabal. Indeed, perhaps that may even have been the strategy, in order to move the global transition forward a bit more quickly. An article appearing on the globalresearch.ca website, posted on October the 1st, offers one synopsis of the two speeches and the meeting. The article writes that contrary to the expectations of many experts who were predicting a second Munich from Vladimir Putin in New York, the Russian president made no grandiose proclamations during his address to the UNGA. In fact, he was outwardly far milder than one might have imagined. By comparison, Obama's emotional speech, which was replete with strident but unsubstantiated claims, seemed sad and occasionally even comical. For example, there was a passage about the ouster of Assad, but less than a day later, the U.S. position had flip-flopped. After the speeches, Putin and Obama sat down for nearly a two-hour conversation, after which the U.S. president could not even rouse himself sufficiently to emerge to speak to journalists. The Russian president conducted an exhaustive press conference on his own. The article suggests that much more may have happened in the last 3 days of September than has met the eye. The article writes that, first of all, the U.S. is making profound changes in its attitude to Ukraine President Poroshenko's regime in Ukraine, assembling a reserve set of quote-unquote politicians and revoking its green light for military action. Incumbent Prime Minister Yatsenyuk is more likely to be replaced by Sergei Lyovshkin, former head of ex-President Yanukovych's administration and member of opposition bloc. Then the article adds that the very next day in Minsk, Alexander Zakharchenko and Leonid Kuchma confirmed that weapons of a caliber less than 100 millimeters would be pulled back 15 kilometers behind the front line in Ukraine, which actually signifies an end to the hostilities. For the preceding 7 months, no one had been able to reach an agreement on this point. At the same time, Kiev admitted that it had committed war crimes in the Donbass region. Obviously, this would not have happened without an order from the American embassy. To this must be added the resignation of Evelyn Farkas, the Pentagon's top official overseeing military relations with Russia and Ukraine. Ms. Farkas had held that position for 5 years, and she will officially leave her post in late October. And all this occurred less than a day after Vladimir Putin's speech in New York and his meeting with Obama. That means that all these events were the result of some kind of deal, and in fact, these are only the first fruits. Clearly, there is more to come, but the trend is clear. The U.S. has acknowledged the legitimacy of Russian claims that Ukraine is within Russia's sphere of interest. A second thing that has happened in the wake of the speeches and meeting was that the situation in and around Syria changed dramatically over the course of one day. The U.S. is no longer insisting on Assad's resignation in Syria. The U.S. is not opposing Russian military involvement in operations against ISIL and is prepared to enter into immediate negotiations with Russia about the formation of a united front against terrorists. The article suggested a victory for Putin, but then asks the question, victory over whom? The author answers, writing that, I would like to emphasize that this is not a victory over Obama, as many experts are simplistically trying to present it, but over a powerful supranational grouping which uses the United States as a battering ram in order to plunge the world into a new Middle Ages. The author sums it up this way, writing the following. The content of Putin's New York speech takes a distant second place to the psychological component of his message to the leaders of the world community and the global decision makers in the West. Time will reveal the significance of that, but looking at how the global picture evolved between September 29th and 30th, we can see that Putin really got through to the intended audience for his statements, and he was more than just heard. Specific agreements have now been reached with Moscow regarding the first steps for getting out of the quagmire into which the backstage elites have led the world. Even the London Independent is picking up on the significance of these events. Tony Brenton A former UK ambassador to Moscow shared his opinions in an article that could be summed up the following way. Ignore the misleading briefings. It is Vladimir Putin who is precipitating change in US and UK policy. Brenton discusses how the US suddenly seems to have backtracked on Ukraine and Syria. The media is portraying one thing, and yet there seems to be a whole bunch of other events happening at the same time underneath. It should also be noted that not only has John Boehner resigned from the U.S. Congress, but, as we heard moments ago, the resignation came for Evelyn Farkas, and also has come the resignation of Army General Marty Dempsey as chair of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff. He was replaced by Navy General Joseph Dunford. For the very informed listeners who are well aware of the U.S. Navy's involvement in extraterrestrial programs, this resignation and subsequent appointment may have a greater meaning that will be revealed in the near future. It may seem that this story is focusing on the negative, but in reality it is bringing further into the light what is going on, in the hopes that by having this information, anyone who chooses to do so can engage others in an informed way without forcing an opinion upon another. Like Putin, we can talk with empowerment and humility, but at the same time lead by our own personal actions. After all, we are the ones we have been waiting for. In other geopolitical news, one item causing varying degrees of polarization is the passing of the Agenda 2030 at the UN. For the purpose of full disclosure here, I have not done full research on this document as of yet. As I have stated in the past, UN documents have been nothing but show and tell, and have not led to any meaningful global change. The same may be true here, although I am choosing to believe that with all that is now happening in the world, I would like to create that there is at least some genuine and sincere energies that are guiding this document. One article, appearing on the New American website, appears to be critical of the Agenda 2030 document, focusing more on the socialism aspect of the document. It might seem to me that the individual is a U.S. Republican and is expressing the fear that the Republicans seem to have of socialism. For this reason, it is perhaps a bit difficult to fairly assess the authenticity of the document, and for now, any who are choosing will have to seek their own discernment as to whether this document feels legitimate at this time. There may, however, be some good news relating to this document, although at the same time it is also another major stain on the reputation of Canada and its Prime Minister. A National Observer article reported on September 26 that Stephen Harper skipped a climate lunch sponsored by UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, a meeting attended by roughly 40 global leaders. The article highlights major achievements by numerous countries to move our world towards the use of greater renewable energies and away from coal, oil, and other mined resources. Brazil became the first major emerging economy to back a commitment towards decarbonization, a goal it shares with Germany. The article noted that nonetheless, other emerging economies are now stepping up to the plate in Brazil's wake, with China rolling out a new national carbon cap and trade system, thereby aligning its climate change policies with the USA's Clean Power Plan to cut emissions by 32% by the year 2030. On that same day, India announced its intention to ramp up renewable energy output five-fold by 2020, moving away from its traditional use of coal power that it uses to generate 254 gigawatts of electricity per day. To encourage more countries to follow the lead of Brazil, China, and India, world leaders will likely endorse greater climate financing to support countries transitioning to clean energy. This may mean the heads of state calling on multilateral development banks to align their investments with the goal of keeping emissions within 2 degrees. Yet, the Canadian government continues to bow down to the interests of big oil and the profits of environmental destruction. Hang in there, Canadians. Perhaps enough people will wake up in time to remove this leader from office, or at the very least expose all the crimes and frauds that have been perpetrated by this leader at the expense of Canadians, humanity, and most importantly, our planet. Also at the UN, RT is reporting on September 30th that a series of WikiLeaks cables that have been made public are now implicating the UK and Saudi Arabia as being involved in a secret deal to secure seats at the UN Human Rights Council, or UNHRC. It is often said that the one making the loudest or most forceful accusations is often trying to cover up one's own guilt of the same issue. According to the RT article, 2 years after the controversial appointment of Saudi Arabia, one of the world's leading human rights offenders, to the UN Human Rights Council, WikiLeaks cables have revealed a secret deal, suggesting that the British government was a key player behind Riyadh's nomination, Riyadh being the capital city in Saudi Arabia. Some of the 61,000 files from the Saudi Foreign Ministry, dated January and February of 2013, translated by both UN Watch and newspaper The Australian, reveal that the two countries reached a secret deal to ensure that they would both be elected to the UNHRC in 2013, despite Saudi Arabia's horrific human rights record. The article adds that one of the secret cables obtained by WikiLeaks in June said the ministry might find it an opportunity to exchange support with the United Kingdom, where the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia would support the candidacy of the United Kingdom to the membership of the Council for the period of 2014-2015 in exchange for the support of the United Kingdom to the candidacy of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Another diplomatic wire stipulated that there was a price tag for being on board the influential UN body. One cable revealed that Saudi Arabia transferred $100,000 for expenditures resulting from the campaign to nominate the kingdom for membership of the Human Rights Council. The WikiLeaks revelations about the secret London-Riyadh trading raise new concerns over the sincerity of Western nations in their claims that they fight for and defend human rights. This is yet another example of an issue that must be brought out into the open in order for people to become aware. As information is exposed, it is no longer a secret, and therefore the cabal loses increasingly more of its power. The UNHRC is, ironically, the agency that oversees all the refugee issues. As one of the wealthiest Arab countries, Saudi Arabia has not taken any of the Muslim refugees, even though Saudi Arabia is itself a Muslim country. CVN reported 2 weeks ago that Saudi Arabia has over 100,000 air-conditioned, fully equipped tents in a desert, but they have not taken in any refugees despite being on this council and despite having so much money. The country, however, was willing to spend millions to build mosques in countries that receive refugees. FrontPageMag.com reported that Saudi Arabia would, in Germany alone, build at least 200 mosques for refugees. Serious questions do need to be asked regarding the nature of the agenda that is behind this manufactured refugee crisis. Continuing with the refugee story, some very unfortunate, although very interesting events are playing out now with regard to this crisis. Europe in general, but also Sweden in particular this week. A bit of a scandal appears to be brewing in the Scandinavian country as people slowly begin to find out the nature and the extent of how they have been screwed over, even from within their social security safety net system known as social democracy. As I have previously mentioned, each society has been an experiment to varying degrees as the cabal attempts to offer the illusion of democracy in various forms and in various countries. The test, if one chooses to call it this, appears to focus on trying to figure out how long it will take for people within their particular system to figure out how they are being taken advantage of, to what extent this has been done, and to finally determine that they have had enough and begin to fight back against the abuse. This abuse has many faces and has been demonstrated historically. People who are given tastes of freedom and support while facing certain crises or difficulties will often be willing to give up more and more of their personal freedoms in order to maintain the freedom that they think they have. The refugee crisis, by design, is polarizing people. Even a statement as simple as that can begin to upset people. Many cannot even begin to grasp just how something like a refugee crisis can be manufactured. The global cabal have become masters at these manufactured crises, although thankfully more and more people are beginning to see through the illusions and are starting to ask deeper questions that are beginning to expose further the nature of these manufactured crises and their underlying agenda. In Greece, the particular experiment there has resulted in the people awakening to the lies and frauds of the criminal banking system, and the people have begun to stand up and speak out. They even elected a government that allegedly was to stand up to the fraudulent EU bailout loans, although this government eventually appeared to have caved in, and now people are facing the sell-off of national assets to foreign interests, causing wealthy people and bureaucrats to get richer and have more control, while the taxpayers will be left to bear the pain of debts created out of thin air. Before getting to the brewing scandal in Sweden, we go first to a BBC interview with UKIP leader for the European Parliament, Nigel Farage, as he points out a little bit more of the scam that this crisis appears to be.
You were in the chamber there for what Jean-Claude Juncker had to say, and he talked about the issue being a matter of humanity and human dignity, and put forward this proposal for quotas to 22 EU countries. What do you think?
The problem with that policy, as I tried to point out at the time, is that it casts the definition for who qualifies way beyond the 1951 Geneva Convention on Refugee Status, and even includes people who come from poor countries. So what we're seeing is this huge tide of humanity coming across the Mediterranean, taking massive risks, being in the hands of the criminal traffickers and ISIS and all the rest of it. And what we're not doing is we're not sorting out who are genuine refugees and who are not. So to ask me to comment on what I think of the Juncker plan to distribute 160,000 people around the rest of Europe, my answer is, why don't we get back to the basics? Why don't we find out who a refugee is, who a refugee isn't? And surely the only way we can stop the drownings and stop the exploitation is to stop the boats coming by having offshore reception centres where we can assess people.
Right, let me follow you down that road in that case. How do you define a genuine refugee in this context?
A refugee, by definition, is an individual in direct fear themselves of persecution because of their race, religion, ethnicity, or political or social beliefs. That is what a refugee is. And we've known that and understood that. And if you look at the people that have come to Europe over the course of the last year, the vast majority of them would not qualify, with the best will in the world, for being refugees.
Even those fleeing the civil war in Syria?
Well, hang on, most people who come to Europe have not come from Syria, and the problem now is because Angela Merkel has really inflated the original message that came from Jean-Claude Juncker 6 months ago. Now anybody can come to Europe, throw their passport into the Mediterranean and say they've come from Syria. So we're just not getting this right, and we're not sorting out who are the genuine refugees. And by the way, you know, I do believe that Britain and the rest of Europe have a duty to help genuine refugees, but not for us to be an open door to economic migrants.
No, one more if I may, because you talked about you want to stop the drownings. Everybody wants to stop the drownings. We are where we are. People are prepared to take enormous risks to get across the Mediterranean in appalling conditions. Whatever measures you take longer term are not going to stop the drownings tomorrow. So what will you do in the immediate term to try and arrest this situation?
I'm sorry, I don't agree with the premise of that question. If you look at many of the people, not all, but many of the people that are coming to European territory, they are paying thousands of euros to people smugglers to get across to mainland Europe.
Because they're desperate.
If they knew that on arriving in Kos or in Lampedusa or indeed in Hungary, that they would simply be refused entry, they would not spend that money and they would not put their lives in the hands of very dangerous criminal gangs and traffickers. And this is exactly what Australia faced back in 2008, and the Australians said, if you come through this route, we guarantee you one thing, you will not be accepted. And that was the way the Australians stopped the drownings, and nobody would call Australia a country that was closed.
The game takes a different tone in Sweden, however. Sweden has long been a country envied for its system of cradle-to-grave social support. It is also a system that has bred a certain amount of complacency within the Swedish population. They have become so addicted to this support that the population in general is not willing to rock the boat concerning other, arguably more important geopolitical issues at the risk of losing this support. Even this week, Euronews has reported that more companies in Sweden are beginning to explore the benefits of a 6-hour workday. CVN first reported on this earlier this year, but it is an idea that seems to be becoming much more popular. As a North American who once worked an average of 10 to 12 hours a day for several companies on low pay and only 2 weeks vacation, the difference I experienced from one company in North America to the same company in Sweden was enough to make me declare that I would never again work for a company in North America. I jumped from 2 weeks vacation after 3 years in North America to 6 weeks vacation in my first year in Sweden, just to name one benefit. In the end, however, I still woke up to the lies of corporate life and chose to walk away despite the challenges that have come since then. The rewards were more fulfilling personally. Farage has mentioned that people other than Syrians are ditching their passports and attempting to get a free ticket into another country. Farage also mentioned another very key element, and that was the fact that many of the refugees paid thousands upon thousands of euros to be transported to these new countries. This would suggest that the alleged refugees are not poor at all, but are, very likely, the wealthier people of the country who are being given the opportunity to leave and receive care in another country at the expense of taxpayers. So elitists are benefiting by attacking and destroying a country for resources and control. Wealthier families in those countries are basically getting a get-out-of-jail-free card. Cabal agents are getting wealthy by transporting refugees. The media gets a few sensational headlines, such as a sinking boat, a boy's body on a beach, or a stampede of alleged refugees where one happens to get tripped and it is caught on camera for the media show. All this to stir up human emotion so that alleged refugees will be taken into European countries where they will destabilize the country and the national economy, with taxpayers unknowingly getting screwed. One might get angry with me at this point and say that it is never a waste to help refugees. You would be correct, assuming that this was a normal and genuine humanitarian crisis. Let's take a look at what is now happening and what may be about to happen in Sweden. Sweden is one country that has been taking in a very large number of refugees. There have been reports of small hotels and hostels being purchased and then are converted to apartments for refugees in some areas away from the major city centers. But it appears that a powder keg may be about to erupt, at least within Stockholm, if not other major cities in the country. Swedes have been told that there is a housing shortage, at least in Stockholm. There are long waiting lists of people who are eager to get an apartment within the city limits, only to be told that they are not available, for whatever reason. Yet, the scandal is now this. Wealthy building owners are apparently taking in refugees and putting them into empty apartments that they own in the city center, bypassing the waiting list of natural Swedes and legitimate residents who have waited years for an apartment. The scandal is currently breaking in Sweden. On September 30th, an article in the Swedish newspaper Svenska Dagbladet, appearing on page 4, broke the story that more than one company connected to the Swedish Immigration Department has apparently been charging outrageous sums of money to house refugees. This has become a major cash cow for people who are already wealthy and owning numerous buildings or apartments around the city. My Swedish is not fluent, but what I believe I understood from the article was this. A single apartment is reportedly worth 60,000 Swedish crowns, or around 7,000 US dollars or 6,000 euro per month. This is the fee being charged to the government department by one company anyway, Aleris, which is owned by one of Sweden's wealthiest families connected to the global cabal, the Wallenberg family. That would be roughly 2,000 Swedish crowns, or 233 US dollars, or 230 euro per day, which puts a single apartment in the range of an upscale hotel room that the owner gets paid for, simply by taking in refugees. To make matters worse, the article lists at least 3 other companies doing exactly the same thing. Positivum is charging roughly 217 US dollars or 192 euro per day. Steget Vidare charges 353 US dollars or 315 euro per day, and Individia is charging 277 US dollars or 246 euro per day. Who ultimately is paying for this? The Swedish taxpayer. In the case of Greece, Greece's wealthy elites received bailout loans that they kept and did not pass along to the people, and the people have had to pay for it. Certain Swedish landowners are cashing in on the scam that appears to be run by at least these 4 companies, and in turn, Sweden must get more loans from the cabal banks to pay for these bills, and the Swedish taxpayer gets stuck with the tab. It seems it did not take long for a reaction. Svenska Dagbladet ran a story on the reaction to the scandal, although the story was pushed a bit further back in the paper to page 6, that there has been a heated reaction to the actions of Aleris and other companies. If it is true that the wealthier refugees are the ones getting these apartments, it is perhaps only a matter of time before the Swedish people begin to declare that they have had enough of their own version of enslavement. What it will also come down to is this. With so many people jumping the queue and getting into prime apartments, while they and cabal-organized companies are getting outrageously wealthy at the expense of the taxpayer, the global cabal is intending that people will direct their anger toward the refugees when the legitimate protest and anger should be directed towards those within Sweden who have allowed this game to be created in the first place, that being mainly the politicians and the corporate elite. In the midst of this unfolding drama, however, something else of potentially great interest happened in Stockholm. Svenska Dagbladet reported on October 1st, China's National Day, that 3 Chinese warships docked in Stockholm Harbor. The article was a very tiny paragraph with a small photo tucked way back on page 8 of the paper. One might expect that 3 Chinese warships appearing in the harbor would be very big news for sure. However, suspiciously, it was not. The paragraph described the ships as stopping in, quote-unquote, on their way home after doing their tour of duty removing pirates from the Gulf of Aden. Those among you who are geography buffs may be asking a question. How is Stockholm on the way home to China from the Gulf of Aden? The fact is, it isn't on the way home. Other listeners will also know that the Gulf of Aden is allegedly the home of a Stargate portal, and this is why so many international ships are present, with pirates merely being the alleged cover story. Sweden has been rumored to be wanting to join NATO. It is unclear if this would ever really happen. Germany, however, appears to be moving away from the US, from NATO, and towards Russia and China. Sweden would become arguably the most industrialized country in Northern Europe, if I am correct, and this might be a reason why Sweden might be courted by NATO. The presence of the ships may have been a subtle message to the Swedish government, and this is why it was not given any meaningful coverage in at least one Swedish paper. I do not have web links for these stories, so if there are any Swedish listeners who can find web links to these stories and send them to me, I will add them to the show summary. I will post details of the stories in the show summary. A link to a video showing the arrival of the ships will also be present. What is absolutely key to remember, however, is this. We are witnessing many things being exposed at this time, and we have a choice to go into fear or stay grounded in the knowledge that things must first be exposed so that people can grasp what is going on before people can take steps to correct it as peacefully and as lawfully as possible. The global cabal is attempting every trick in their book in their paranoid state of losing power, and they are getting careless. It does not help humanity, nor does it help the planet to entertain fear-based scenarios. The boil on the skin has broken, and there is poison coming out of the wound. It is messy, and there is the harder core inside the wound, the global cabal, that must now be removed. Once it is removed, there will be a hole in the skin, but it will begin to heal. We are moving forward in truth and in humanity's power. Anchor only the most loving and peaceful energies you can to empower as many around you as possible to not fall into the fear traps at this time. A little bit of Canadian election news for our Canadian listeners this week. An article has surfaced that may be of benefit for Canadians seeking to better understand how their politicians have been voting on numerous issues. The article, by Charles Mandel, appearing on the National Observer News website on September 24th, reports that Shay Neufeld, a Vancouver native, completing his doctorate in neuroscience at Harvard, became frustrated while looking for information online about how members of Parliament voted. While government websites showed information about individual bills, it was nearly impossible to find how a specific MP or Member of Parliament or Minister voted on the bills or see how often they sat out on votes. With an election looming, Neufeld thought it was imperative that Canadians know the track record of the people they were voting for. Shay and his brother Braden teamed up to create the website votes.mp. Neufeld was quoted as saying that we noticed that it's actually rather difficult to figure out how a politician has voted on bills. The information is publicly available, but bills are voted on multiple times for multiple reasons, so it's not easy to quickly see which bills they ultimately supported, rejected, or abstained from voting on. As a student living in the U.S., he discovered that there were many websites to track the voting records of U.S. politicians, but this facility just does not exist in a comprehensive format in Canada. Even searching through Google search engine provided very little information on Canadian politicians. Neufeld felt that there was a hole in the ability of Canadians to quickly access information relating to members of Parliament. According to the article, as the brothers note on their website, decoding votes on bills can be slow and difficult to understand. Every bill is voted on multiple times, sometimes to pass amendments, sometimes to determine if it will even be discussed, and attempting to analyze the votes a politician makes can be more confusing than informative. Neufeld wondered whether he could create a website that would do exactly that, track MPs and their voting patterns. That's where his brother Braden came in. Braden had the coding skills necessary to create the physical website. The brothers have been working on the database since June and have set up their website to work alongside another website, openparliament.ca. The votes.mp website collects information automatically about once a week. The website currently, according to the article, shows the final vote from each MP on a given bill and whether the bill passed or not. The voting record dates back 5 or 6 sessions of Parliament, although Neufeld hopes to build more into the site. The story offers an excellent example of how one can be in service to humanity, even if the service is not directly related to one's career. When Neufeld was younger, he was interested in journalism and not particularly interested in science. However, destiny had him moving over to major in neuroscience and minor in physics. The article notes that the Votes.mp project gave him an opportunity to improve his coding skills, and as he nears the conclusion of his doctorate at Harvard, he finds himself thinking about the use of large sets of data. Particularly, Neufeld is interested in building and interpreting big data sets around how people learn, and then using those to create educational policies. As a scientist, that's what makes me happy. I'm all about using data and evidence to form conclusions. In a related story, an article in the Toronto Star revealed on October 1st that 356 political appointees have donated more than 760,000 Canadian dollars between 2004 and 2014 to the Conservative Party governed by Stephen Harper. A database website called someofus.org has compiled the information, and according to campaign director Rosa Curry, it's clear that there is a pattern of rewarding money and loyalty with influential appointments. As people become more informed about their immediate world and choose to act with courage, passion, and conviction, so then can the larger world begin to manifest, offering something better for everyone, for the highest good of all. In some financial news for the week now, things are seemingly a bit quiet, although I have no doubt that there are some behind-the-scenes events taking place in light of the geopolitical activity starting to unfold. Perhaps there are a few small tidbits of news to look at, however. We heard a few moments ago that China had set up a fund for countries in the southern hemisphere. With more on that, an article appearing on the BRICS Post website on September 26th has reported that at the UN General Assembly on Saturday, Chinese President Xi Jinping announced a $2 billion South-South Cooperation Aid Fund to help developing countries in their efforts towards sustainable development over the next 15 years. China will continue to increase investment in the least developed countries, aiming to increase its total to $12 billion by 2030, Xi said at the UN Sustainable Development Summit in New York. What is also really interesting to note is that China has taken a step in demonstrating debt forgiveness as well. The article adds that China will exempt the debt of the outstanding intergovernmental interest-free loans due by the end of 2015 owed by the relevant least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing countries, he added. China will also push for immediacy in operations of the newly launched BRICS Bank and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, Xi said. At the UNGA Special Summit, the Chinese president called for equitable, open, and all-round development for all. In another story relating to China, Cosmic Vision News has been reporting on the challenges that China has been facing in an attempt to get its currency recognized by the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, as being part of a special basket of currencies known as the Special Drawing Rights, or SDR. The U.S., since 2010, has been using its power of veto to prevent the Chinese currency, or the currency of any emerging market, to be included in this basket. In what may be another turnaround for the U.S., the Geopolitics website is reporting on September 27th that after reassuring the United States that its economy will be propped up by China, Obama has given his thumbs up to the inclusion of the renminbi into the IMF's SDR basket of currencies. This will pave the way for the exclusion of the fiat dollar from the global financial system in the coming days. Of course, there are other covert arrangements which led us to conclude that the East is only really aiming for a peaceful win-win resolution of all conflicts with the West, and that the best they, meaning the reformists, could do for the time being is to initiate an all-inclusive economic system, and it is up to us to exploit and maximize that scenario where no one is left behind. Andrew Maeda writes that the shift in the U.S. position follows the administration's failed attempt to prevent allies from joining the China-led Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank earlier this year, a strategy that was faulted by former policymakers, including ex-Treasury Secretary Henry Paulson. The IMF's executive board will make a decision on the yuan reserve currency issue as soon as November. Approval requires 70% of the fund's voting shares, and even if the U.S. opposed the move, the nation would need several allies because the U.S. has about 17% of votes. Many analysts have been predicting approval. Two financial sources in the article have suggested that at least 1 trillion of global reserves will convert to Chinese assets if the yuan joins the IMF's reserve basket. The U.S. position is beginning to fall into line with those of the UK and France, both of whom have stated a willingness to include China in the basket of currencies. This particular article had suggested that this decision came as a result of China allegedly agreeing to purchase a large order of Boeing aircraft and allow Boeing to build a plant in China to meet the country's growing transportation needs. This may be in a bit of conflict, however, with another article appearing on the BRICS Post on September 21st, suggesting that China and Russia are intending to finalize a deal to construct twin-engine jets, also known as wide-bodies. Presumably, this deal would be done without the involvement of any U.S. dollars. Given the rapid advancement of new technologies, these deals do not seem to be very meaningful, as I would be inclined to bet that jet fuel aircraft will start to become more obsolete as new technologies are released. Therefore, I'm inclined to speculate that something else is going on behind the scene. Over to technology and science-related news. We start by going to Egypt, where researchers are claiming to have created desalination technology that is cheap, made in a lab with local materials, and converts salty water to pure water in minutes. The article by Jennifer Hicks, contributing to Forbes.com, writes that there's a desalination technology out there today for large-scale processing, but it's expensive. The largest, based on reverse osmosis technology, is in Israel and was commissioned by the Israeli government at a cost of $500 million, no doubt paid for with U.S. money. It's expensive because it uses a lot of electricity to process the water through polymer membranes, which reduce the particles in the water. The research out of Alexandria University is based on a technique called pervaporation, which filters the water through synthetic membranes to remove large particles in the water first. Then the water is heated until it evaporates. To remove the small particles, the water is condensed to yield clean, drinkable water. Apparently, this new technology does not require electricity, which is great for markets where there is limited electrical energy. The technology also, however, uses local materials, which helps those countries that are unable to afford the more expensive option. An article on the SciDev.net website on September 10th by Rasha Duadar goes into more of the specifics of the technology. Duadar writes that according to the research paper published in Water, Science and Technology last month, this method can be used to desalinate water which contains different types of contamination, such as salt, sewage, and dirt. This kind of water is difficult to clean quickly using existing procedures. The membrane technology, in combination with vaporization, can be applied in remote settings, as it requires only the membranes for the filtering process, and fire to vaporize the filtered water, the researchers say. Using prevaporation eliminates the need for electricity that is used in classic desalination processes, thus cutting costs significantly. Prevaporation is used to separate organic liquids like alcohols and is one of the more common systems used in sewage treatment to separate water from organic solvents. The technology has been around since the mid-1990s. Helmi El-Zanfali, a professor of water contamination at Egypt's National Research Center, says. Western media has traditionally ignored scientific developments coming out of the so-called lesser developed countries and has suppressed much knowledge that could have helped clean up our planet long ago. A second article on the same site from 2009 has written on how Africa has been exploring and developing nanotechnologies for clean water since that year. This article offered that nanotechnology can help alleviate these problems by offering new techniques and equipment for conducting water research, as well as new purification methods. In the field of nanofiltration, South Africa's Northwest University has built a treatment plant that incorporates ultrafiltration membranes to clean brackish groundwater in a rural village. The plant removes pollutants such as chloride, nitrate, phosphate, and sulfate to produce safe drinking water for domestic and community use. In Brazil, the Brazilian Agricultural Research Corporation, Embrapa, is hoping to develop a biodigestion system using nanofilters to clean irrigation supplies and eventually make the water safe for drinking. Biodigestion without nanofilters is already used to treat sewage in both rural and urban areas. It cannot be emphasized enough that humanity must first begin to see and acknowledge that things are not going the way humanity claims to want things to go, and that humanity must then find the courage to step up and remove those who are not acting for the highest good of humanity or our planet. Beautiful souls worldwide are attempting to share information, but we must all do our part to help those, especially in the Western world, to begin to see how they have been heavily deceived and controlled for the benefit of a small group profiting from their enslavement and from the destruction of our planet. The times are changing, and this is a positive movement for humanity as this group continues to be exposed more and more, and groups of people worldwide are beginning to set the example that shows others how to be the example they are claiming to want for our planet. Although Western leaders and media are trying to tell the world a different story, for those who are truly paying attention to the real events unfolding that involve Russia, one may gain a more complete picture of why the Western world is so afraid of Russia, China, and perhaps a few other countries at this time. Western power brokers are slowly coming to grips with the fact that they are losing power and control, and that other countries are surging forward with advanced knowledge and technologies. Russia and China, instead of focusing on media distractions, have been quietly moving along with their own developments. It has been suggested that one not attempt to fight an oppressive structure, but rather create a new structure that makes the old one obsolete. In effect, this is what is beginning to happen on our world, and has been for some time, although it has taken years for things to become more visible to the doubting mainstream public. An article on the Peaceful Warriors website was showing that Russia, even as far back as 2010, was already attempting to show that humans have the ability and potential to influence the energetic environment around them, and thus the world at large. This week, I would like to offer another message from a source that some will choose to dispute as authentic or even real. Those who are still grounded within the more 3D energies have not yet been able to expand their consciousness to a space of awareness that sees our current reality as being less real and connecting to a deeper source within oneself and the bigger reality of which we are all a part. One may accept what any journalist says or writes, or even what anyone else says or writes, because the individual is perceived as real, or at least physical, and therefore somehow deserves greater credibility than a source that one is not able to perceive as real or physical. So it all comes down to how one chooses to feel about the information being offered, as opposed to the source that is offering it. Humanity is being uplifted in ways that the vast majority are not yet able to perceive on a physical level, although many do describe feeling or sensing that something is happening, even if they are unable to explain what this is at this time. We are beginning to witness physical events that are incredible in both positive and seemingly negative ways, at least at this time. Many are beginning to tap into some of this higher awareness, either by conscious choice or perhaps by surprise, as one subconsciously directs oneself towards finding answers that one may be seeking at this time. It is happening worldwide. A source named Cryon offers a message via Lee Carroll, expanding on this ability of communication called channeling and how it is no longer exclusive to a select few, but indeed a very gift that every human has access to if one is choosing to hear or access it. Cryon also expands on the science of what is happening to our environment and the issue that some are calling global warming. There are answers available if we step up to claim them. Take what is meaningful from the message offered and set aside anything that does not feel right at this time. Perhaps it will feel right at some other time.
Again, we are here in a way that may seem strange to many. I want you to get used to hearing this voice. I want you to understand the reality that is here. You would ask yourself, human being, is this real? You might say, Cryon, I'm having a hard time believing that you're really channeling and that the voice comes from the other side of the veil. It's so difficult. If that's what you're saying today, human being, I will say, blessed are you. For these are honest words coming from one who is struggling to work out of the three-dimensional box. And what happens is that slowly, if you ask the right questions of your own self, of your own belief, of your own psyche, you start getting shown things you didn't expect. For if indeed it is a quantum experience on the other side of the veil, if indeed I am linearizing this conversation and presenting it to my partner, if this is true, this is a quantum experience. And that means that language is only a small part of it. That the audio that you would hear or the words that are seen on the page, such a small part of it. We have spoken of something called the third language. This third language, identified some time ago, is not a language in linearity. It is a language of the catalyst of the three. We use the three in numerology to represent a catalytic action number. That is to say that all of you have the ability to receive what is being given at a level which is quantum and not language, and not words on a page. Art and music. We've told you that they are quantum. We have told you how you can go into the Louvre and watch a painting, that you can immerse yourself so completely that you can see and feel the artist creating it, that you become one with the creator of the painting. So much is there that is not for the human eye, and this is the one who appreciates the art. Music touches your very soul, all of the notes playing together in unison in harmony. It is one of the only arts where all of that can be presented together and there's no limit to the number of musicians on a stage. But you can't do that with speech, can you? No limit to the number of colors on a palette. You can't do that with speech, can you? There's a little bit of quantum in everything, if you look. So look for it here before we start. A message that is not going to be a quantum one filled with love necessarily, although it is. But we're choosing to do something unusual. We're going to give you some science. When we give a scientific message, when we give suggestions, I ask my partner to go very slow. Some of this has been revealed to him and some of it has not. I ask him to proceed slowly, for it will be seen and read clearly, and much will be seen around it. For what follows in this message is not just esoterics. There will be a practicality, and there will be physicists looking at it. And that makes my partner nervous. It is not going to be complex, for even the one sitting in the chair who doesn't understand science will still receive what they need to receive through the third language, and will understand why these things are being given. It's about the environment. And let us start with assurance. Let us review one more time that what you are seeing in weather changes on this planet you have not created by yourselves with human effort. What you have called global warming is not global warming at all. And I say it again, it is part of a cycle that always was. The North Pole has melted several times and come back several times. It is a waxing and waning. The water evaporation cycle that has been here before, it is here sooner than expected, and that is alarming. If you were to ask Gaia, the actual energy of Gaia right now, to come into this place, Gaia would give this message: humans have not caused this. Could it be any clearer? And I give you this information so there would be no alarm sounded of things that you would have to change drastically and dramatically. Now, at the same time I would say that, I would say this: there is a mandate to change your energy. What you put into the air is significant, for it is a hazard to your health. What you put into the air hurts humanity, not necessarily Gaia. Gaia is more resilient than you think. Gaia adjusts in ways you don't expect. Gaia takes care of Gaia. Clean up the air, and you will live longer. It's going to get colder. That's one of the subjects of today. You're going to need more energy. And we have given you the steps of creating energy easily. And we've given you advice in the past. And one of them we wish to revisit. For it's time for you to think out of the box of three-dimensional when it comes to some of the things that we have discussed with you. You think in a straight line. You don't think past necessarily certain things that you assume. At the same time I give you this information, I will also tell you that this particular information is already known on the planet. We do not give you something that has not already occurred to a human being. Free choice is what we have told you is the operative word, even in science. This must have occurred, and a human being must have had a situation where they're actually aware before we will give you a message like this. And the reason we do it is because one human being aware sometimes can do nothing about it. But the thought is given. When these thoughts are given to humanity, they normally land on the planet in more than one place. That is to say, epiphanies of discovery happen all at once, usually 3 to 4 times, in order to assure that they will not be lost. And so I am going to add this voice. There is tremendous energy available from the earth for free. It is not free energy, for you have to build an extractor to get it, but it's everywhere. It is called geothermal energy, and it goes like this. Below your feet, not very far, not really. It's hot. Hot enough for you to drill down and create steam. If you can create steam through natural process of thermal energy of the planet, you can drive turbines and create electricity. That will create heat.
Cryon also goes into some detail about the use of nanotechnology in offering clean water, as we heard in the last story. But due to time constraints leading up to airtime, I was unable to get all the material ready in time as far as editing goes. The link to the full recording will appear in the show summary for those interested in hearing the rest of the recording. Finally, in health news, it seems yet another European country has jumped onto the anti-GMO bandwagon, and it is a country that is closely aligned with NATO and the U.S. corporate agenda. Amanda Freilich, writing for the True Activist website on October the 1st, cites a report from Radio Poland that the nation of Poland has officially announced its decision to join 13 other nations so far in its excluding Monsanto's controversial crops from its nation's farmlands. The news was announced by Informacyjna Agencja Radiowa, a press agency working with the Polski Radio in Poland. The 14th country to opt out of growing GM crops, Poland joins the ranks of Slovenia, Serbia, Croatia, Latvia, Italy, Germany, Scotland, Wales, Lithuania, Austria, Ireland, France, and Greece. Many countries are boycotting Monsanto's controversial crops, specifically the biotech company's genetically modified maize, for fear that GMOs will contaminate the country's natural crops. According to Scotland's Rural Affairs Secretary Richard Lochhead, I am concerned that allowing GM crops to be grown in Scotland would damage our clean and green brand, thereby gambling with the future of our $14 billion food and drink sector. The article adds that earlier this year, for example, Polish farmers protested in the streets and took their tractors to shut down motorways. They sought to express their disapproval of foreign influences taking over their industry and succeeded. The country of Poland has now made it official that Monsanto's genetically engineered crops will not be allowed within its borders moving forward. Apparently, countries in Europe have been given until October the 3rd to decide officially if they will opt out of the GMO food program. At this time, it is unclear if Poland has made this choice in order to favor trade with Russia and BRICS countries, or whether Poland has begun to see the light of deception within the NATO alliance, and this is one step towards a new future. In this week's Final Words, the journey towards awakening to one's ultimate service at this time is not easy. Perhaps, arguably, it is much easier compared to the paths of enlightened ones who preceded us, because there were fewer of them, and they had to do greater work to break through the veil. According to some sources, those of us awakening now have access to greater help, as we heard a little bit from Cryon moments ago, but we cannot escape the fact that each one choosing to awaken must also journey through one's own darkness to shatter the veil and find one's truth. An article on the upliftconnect.com website about awakening shares the following. Make no bones about it, awakening is not a walk in the park. It is a ride through hell. It is the tearing down of all your cherished beliefs and everything you thought about yourself. There is no way around this. In The Hobbit, the desolation of Smaug, they had to enter into the Mirkwood forest to get to their destination. There was no other way for them. It was not a walk in the park. Likewise, we must enter the Shadowlands and come face to face with our shadows. It is there that our false ideas of who we are shattered. It is there that all of our false beliefs are destroyed. We must face these false notions and see them for what they are. This is the only way to heal, to become whole again, and to live in integrity. We close with a message this week from a healer based in Stockholm. Jeremy Halpin was born in Australia and has been practicing Eastern medicine since his early 20s. He has been in practice for 27 years as a Zen Shiatsu therapist, acupuncturist, healer, and teacher. Apart from establishing diploma courses in alternative medical disciplines in 4 countries, he is also a published researcher in the emerging field of integrative medicine, an emerging health field serving the cooperation and synergy of Western and alternative medical models in clinical practice. His popular lecture series, Conscious Health, has been run in Stockholm for several years and has attracted people from all cultures that are interested in improving one's health and one's life. He shares a message that can be found on his blog, jeremyhalpin.com. All links will be in the show summary for the Final Words segment. Jeremy looks at the nature of addiction and how it controls our impulses. As humanity moves forward in co-creating this new reality we are claiming to want, part of one's journey requires acknowledging the things one is addicted to in one's current world and learning how to release these addictions with courage, compassion, and self-love. Create a wonderful week. Until our next moment of now, here's Jerry Halpin speaking on dangerous impulses.
The unhappy person is easily cheated. This is a saying I've heard many times from friend and colleague Carl Ribari. It suggests that if we do not take personal responsibility for the mechanisms that make us happy or unhappy, we can easily lose control and become slaves of things outside ourselves. Now, what does that sound like? Addiction. I can give up any time, as long as it's tomorrow. One of the primary differences between so-called addictive and non-addictive personalities is that the addict has what is referred to as a poor internal locus of control. That is, they lack the ability to regulate and control their impulses. This means that it is only a matter of time before an external control will appear to regulate the behavior for them. Impulse control is part of our maturation process. There are many obstacles that can sabotage that process, however. Probably the first one people of modern societies will encounter comes from interfering with our internal chemistry and its influence on the brain. Sugar, the gateway drug of poor choice. While the war on drugs hysteria aims its weapons at the recreational drug trade, no supposed gateway drug like marijuana can compete with the legal one we were all exposed to years ago, sugar. Our physical and mental energies run on a very simple fuel, sugar and water. We are genetically disposed to allow sugar, glucose in the blood, to pass the blood-brain barrier and fuel our nervous system. It is also the fuel that drives most metabolic activity. The problem is this. We cannot easily differentiate between natural and synthetic or processed sugar. Well, we can, but because refined sugar is, by its very nature, a very specific quick hit, our body can quickly become addicted to it. Most foods with a sugar content also contain many other nutrients that help us metabolize sugar more efficiently. An apple or a carrot, for example, will also contain fiber, minerals, vitamins, along with small amounts of protein. The digestion of these will cause the sugar content to be released more slowly into the blood, as well as providing a buffer to the potential nutrient leaching of sugar alone. Sugar naturally requires a complement of minerals in particular to be metabolized by the body. If that does not come pre-packaged with the sugar content itself, as it does in natural food sources, it will use mineral reserves in the body. Possibly more serious is refined sugar's effect on our mind and impulse control. Not only does the consumption of sugar affect our blood sugar levels, causing them to swing up and down in an ongoing war with our pancreas, but it causes an unstable supply line of energy to the brain. This affects our ability to focus and, among other things, control our impulses. Interestingly, just the thought of having sugar releases the pleasure-reward hormone dopamine in our brain. Dopamine response is a primary component of addiction. Have you noticed how the concept of luxury in everything has crept in and taken a greater and greater place in our collective impulse control? The rise and spread of the luxury goods market from purely high-income bracket target markets and into all levels of society has been ubiquitous. From how to spend it luxury supplements in newspapers to selling the most mundane product as luxurious indulgence aims at one thing, our ability to control our impulses to have that hit again and again. Luxury, after all, is a lot like refined sugar. It is not something we need, but it can quickly become something we crave. There are several inherent problems here. The most obvious is personal. What if we do not have the luxury budget to supply our craving for the drug of luxury? Personal debt in modern consumer societies have skyrocketed in the last few decades. Why? Because we have allowed ourselves to be convinced that, regardless of our financial situation, we too can and should enjoy the good life of luxury. Of course, the cognitive dissonance that occurs when, on the one hand, we want to be among the rich, while on the other, we also know that we are not actually rich ourselves, causes us to rescale our illusion somewhat. This opens the door for some clever marketing campaigns. Our dopamine-frenzied, sugar-destabilized, poor impulse-controlled minds simply fudge the math and focus on luxury items only just out of reach. Just out of reach is still out of reach, however. What makes up that shortfall is credit. Credit, of course, is the positive spin word for debt. It is a long fall from that ivory tower, or gold-encrusted toilet seat, when we realize our luxury addiction can make us just as poor as any addictive drug. It doesn't seem to do much for our sense of taste and style either. Just like our oral nature was sorely tested through everything we take in, so is the other end of the chain. Our addictive-driven overconsumption also leads to record levels of waste being generated. The Western world now generates so much waste, it has to take it offshore into giant floating barges. We are literally drowning in our own waste. Suddenly we find we have several global problems that have the same root: unrestrained impulse addiction. Whether we are aware of it or not, if we cannot restrain and regulate our own addictions, we directly contribute to overconsumption of finite planetary resources, toxic waste buildup, polluting our land, oceans, and ecosystems, an obscene wealth gap between the richest and poorest. By longing after things outside ourselves, we increase our sense of poverty and lower our own sense of worth. This in turn makes us self-critical and ultimately self-destructive. This has links to several meridian systems in the body. The earth element controls our oral nature and digestion. It is our link to earth via eating, which becomes our earth body. It also rules over the functions we attribute to the pancreas. Ironically, rich foods leave us in poor health. Our overburdened digestive organs are forced to dump what we cannot metabolize. This may vary from fat deposits and obesity to arterial plaque and crystallization in the joints. If that were not harmful enough, the chronic state of low-grade inflammation caused from such overindulgence becomes the spearhead of many serious health issues, from heart disease to cancer. The metal element in traditional Chinese medicine is responsible for our organs of elimination, the colon, lungs, and skin. Chronic problems in all three areas via nagging infections, phlegm production, constipation and irritation of the bowels, skin inflammations and discharges and so on, all point to a system overloaded by an excess of unnecessary energy. Notice how, in the energy model, this is not called toxins. It is simply seen as a build-up of energy not appropriate for the health of the organism. In an expanded perspective, we are seeing the same thing happening on our beautiful blue planet. Resisting the urge. Probably the most important reason to be vigilant about our impulsive nature is because, as we mentioned at the beginning of this blog, if we do not regulate ourselves, we will invite external regulation to be imposed upon us. Personally, this can mean the shock of disease. Collectively, this may be even more sinister. The best solution? Personal responsibility. We are responsible for our own health and happiness unless we give it away. Giving away the responsibility and power over our own health and happiness is not to be recommended. After all, the unhappy person is easily cheated.
So that is a sample of the unfolding higher consciousness news around the world this week. Cosmic Vision News is broadcast weekly from the CosmicVisionNews.com website. Links to stories used in this broadcast are published in the show summary, which is on the website. CVN can be followed through the CVN Facebook page, Scene page, YouTube channel, as well as on Twitter, Google+, and LinkedIn. Thank you for sharing your time with me. I'm Jeffrey West, reminding you that being on a spiritual path does not prevent one from facing times of darkness, but it teaches one how to use the darkness as a tool to grow. Until our next moment of now, stay grounded in love, hold the vision of light and peace in your hearts, and keep your eyes to the skies, disclosures unfolding all around you. Namaste.